Howdy my totally as always tubular gamers, we're back. Another day, another ranking video. You already know what's going on. Now, today's is going to be a bit of an interesting ranking video. It's going to be on the spin-offs of a series, just the spin-offs. We're going to be looking at all of the spin-offs for the Serious Sam series. Now, I'm sure a lot of you know the Serious Sam franchise and probably like it like I do. I'm a huge Sam fan. If you somehow don't, I don't know why you clicked on this video, but it is a series of first-person shooters where you get dumped into the desert or a relatively large environment and kill things in an old-school fashion. And you know, like I said, I'm a really big fan. Now, last year, as in 2021, I think, I ranked all of the main Serious Sam games, that being First and Second Encounter, 2, 3, and 4, and I think that they're all good to great games and all provide something that is engaging and fun and brings something new to the table to first-person shooters. I think they're all really good times. And I noticed on that video I got a bunch of comments like, what about this Sam game? What about this other Sam game? What about this indie game that has Serious Sam in it? Well, you see, Serious Sam is a bit more complicated than that. While most people know and love the first-person shooter series by Crow Team, the original developers, it seems that somewhere throughout Sam's history things have gotten a little muddied. You see, right before Serious Sam 3 came out, Devolver Digital, the owner and publisher of the Serious Sam games, started pumping out these other Serious Sam games not by Crow Team and not in the first-person shooter style. They were called the Serious Sam Indie series, and you know, they seemed pretty harmless. One of them was like a little 2D run and gun shooter, one of them was supposed to be like a little RPG. They were pretty cheap, pretty small, pretty indie. Nothing really big about them. I mean, it was just a little side game, wasn't really anything to it, just kind of a little extra marketing for Serious Sam 3, the big main game, the first-person shooter. However, over the years, something happened, and all of a sudden we kept snowballing down this hill with indie games and more Serious Sam spin-offs, and now we're just at this point in 2022 where there are way more Serious Sam spin-offs than main games. There's actually twice as many Serious Sam spin-offs as there are main games. You know, the series that is known for being the first-person shooter where you kill everything, like half of the games in the franchise now aren't even what I just described. They're all this other stuff. It's all these weird mix-ups of genres and gameplay elements that just have nothing to do with what the series was about. Like, I think if you were a fan of Serious Sam, you're probably a fan of the first-person shooters. And so they decided to make all these games that weren't first-person shooters and just have the Serious Sam name on it. But enough bitching, whining, and complaining about the series and what it's become. Let's actually look at the spin-off games. There are a ton of spin-off games, and I have actually played all of the spin-off games, and I even just completed the newest one, Siberian Mayhem, and I thought, let's just rank all the spin-offs. Since I ranked all the main games, let's do the spin-offs too. We're going to be ranking these games on a couple things. We're going to be ranking them mostly on quality. Was there any quality control with Devolver Digital, or were they just pumping out garbage the whole time? Are these games fun? Are they engaging? Do they bring anything to the Serious Sam formula? Are they even close to the Serious Sam formula? And just really, how good are they? If I'm missing a game on here, it's probably because I had it in my last ranking video. I also won't have any of the VR games on here, since I don't know if those are main game spin-offs, and you know, I don't really know much about the VR Serious Sam games, so I'm just not going to have them on here. Anyway, let's get right to it. Like, share, comment, sub. Let me know your favorite weapon or game of Serious Sam, and what do I think is the worst of the Serious Sam games? What really is the bottom of the barrel garbage? Serious Sam the Greek Encounter is easily the worst of the Sam games and is arguably not even a Sam game at all. It is part of the Serious Sam Indie series, however it was never released on Steam or really all that commercially. It came out shortly after Serious Sam 3 in 2012 and was part of a Humble Bundle that was by Devolver Digital, and it included this game, and that's been the only way to ever even play it unless you find a download for it online. And really, I would not recommend that at all, because this game is trash. I don't really know what they were going for with this game, but it is not good. It is a top-down shooter based on Serious Sam, and you fight through hordes of enemies in Greece-themed levels while trying to reach the exit of the level. You just kill a bunch of enemies on screen, and you know, this top-down stuff will come back later in a different game, and it could be done a hell of a lot better. There's only 3 stages in the game, so you can beat the game real quick, but if you die, you pretty much have to start over. You can only carry one weapon at a time, which is really interesting and different for the series, and fighting these enemies really just doesn't feel very good. The game doesn't feel very good, it doesn't flow well, it doesn't control well, it's really awkward, it's stiff, and you know, you might only get one weapon at a time, but they give you so much ammo for this stuff that, like, it doesn't even matter. You just find the cannon or you find like the flamethrower and you just get so much ammo for it that you just annihilate everything and beat the game in like 20 minutes or whatever. It's like, what is even the point of this game? This should not even be a Serious Sam game, let alone even like, it shouldn't even be on this list. But here we are. I know if I don't have it, somebody's gonna say that I missed it, and it's really just a waste of time. Our next game is Serious Sam: The Random Encounter. Now, the Random Encounter came out in 2011, around when Serious Sam 3 did, and this game is about as far removed from Serious Sam as it gets. The game is a turn-based RPG with a couple little action role-playing elements, but it is primarily a turn-based RPG. If that doesn't scream, this is not Serious Sam, I don't really know what does. Now, I love me some RPGs, I really do, but this is not a good RPG. This is not a good Sam game, this is not a good RPG, and I don't know who thought that this would make for a good combination. The game is just not very good at all. Like most RPGs, there's kind of two types of gameplay to it. There's where you're just kind of walking around the world, interacting with the characters, the environment, getting into battles, exploring, etc. And then there's, you know, the battles themselves. When you're interacting with the world, exploring around, all that, I mean, it's fine enough. It feels like an RPG Maker game, but enough about that. The battles themselves, though, ugh. These battles, they're just not good. It's Sam and a couple buddies fighting these giant waves of enemies, and you know, you take turns attacking and you dodge attacks, but it really just isn't cohesive. It doesn't make a lot of sense. You're just kind of dodging and taking your turns, shooting whenever you can. And I guess you got to use some strategic planning to try to plan out where the enemies are going to attack and dodge those spots, and also plan your attacks so you hit as many as possible. And you know, this just does not really work. Like, this just does not really work all that well. Maybe I just wasn't getting it, maybe it just wasn't clicking with me and I wasn't really comprehending it, but I also thought it was like stupid hard. Like, I was dying almost every battle, and you know, I just eventually put it down pretty quick, and I've seen that it's not very long either, so at least it's mercifully short, but I just did not sit well with this one. I was like, this is just not a very good game. Our next game is Serious Sam: Kamikaze Attack. This was originally released on iOS and Android in 2013 for Serious Sam 3. However, it was re-released on Steam in 2021. Yeah. So this is a iPhone game, and I mean, it plays about as well as you would think it plays. You actually get to play as a kamikaze, and you gotta hunt Sam down. It's not an endless runner, but it is a 2D platformer where you just kind of dodge the same looking things over and over and kick stuff back at Sam and eventually get to him and blow him up. I mean, there's not all that much to it. It's a very simple gameplay loop. It's very repetitive. Every mission is literally the same. You just run, you jump a couple times, you can charge and kick stuff, and you just try to get to Sam and blow him up. There's a ton of different levels. There's the desert level, and then there's the jungle level, and that's it. But there's a ton of different, you know, like individual levels in between them, but again, they all feel exactly the same because you're doing the exact same thing over and over. There's little side objectives thrown in here and there, like where it's like try to kick as many frogs or try to get to Sam this fast or something like that, but it's really basic. There's really not much to it. I beat it in like an hour, and I was like, I mean, I guess there could have been something fun here. I mean, as a little iOS game, it's pretty harmless, but I mean, I had more fun with this than the Random Encounter and Greek Encounter, so there is that at least. But yeah, there's really not much to talk about here. It's literally as basic as it looks. Our next game is Serious Sam Advance. Now, this was not put out by Devolver Digital since they weren't around at the time. Now, Serious Sam Advance isn't a very good game, and it's a pretty mediocre to bad first-person shooter. However, you got to remember, this was on the Game Boy Advance. You do have to cut it a little bit of slack, but even with that, I don't think that this is a very good game, and I think there are actually better first-person shooters on the GBA. The game sees Sam fighting Mental's hordes in Egypt, so at least that's the same. And I mean, it is a first-person shooter, so it definitely is a Serious Sam game. The game is 12 levels, and most of them play actually very similar to a regular Serious Sam game, where it's just a bunch of enclosed areas, and you get dropped into arenas and shoot everything that moves and try to dodge enemies. And I mean, hey, that sounds fun, and then it's on the GBA, but unfortunately, it just doesn't play very well. Now, the actual flow of this game is just terrible, especially if you're not playing it on an original GBA. Like, it's really rough. Like, obviously the graphics are going to be really rough and ruggedy and not very good, but the frame rate is just awful. Like, it is not good. The game is incredibly jittery. Like, it jitters all over the place. It's making me sick. And then the game just feels incredibly tedious, sluggish, and slow. Like, I've never felt this slow in a Serious Sam game. The issues don't end there, though. The controls are pretty horrible all around. They don't feel very well. It's extremely clunky. The hit detection is very unreliable and questionable on both sides, the enemies and yours. The crosshair is pretty sus. I don't really know if it works all the time, to be honest. And yeah, this game just doesn't really have a lot going for it, but it somehow made it this high on the list. I mean, it is a first-person shooter. There is some half-decent level design here, especially for the GBA, and you know, it still can feel like a Serious Sam game, more so than some of these other games. But again, this was done on the GBA. I mean, I should be impressed this thing can run this at all, and I mean, it gets a little medal for trying, I guess, but I absolutely would not recommend this to anybody, and if you really want to play a GBA FPS, try the Duke Nukem one. It's a lot better than this. Our next game is a game I had some enjoyment with, at least, and that is Serious Sam Tormental, which is actually still technically in early access, but I was just like, screw it, I'm just going to include it on this list anyway. I doubt much of it is going to change, and I doubt its place would ever change on this list. Now, graphically and aesthetically, this is about as far removed from Serious Sam as it gets. Like, it does not get any further removed than this. It really doesn't. But, I mean, at least there's a little bit of fun to be had here. The game is a top-down shooter, and it is a roguelike. Now, I think the best comparison would honestly be Enter the Gungeon or maybe Binding of Isaac. It plays very similar to those, where you just kind of shoot everything that moves, move through some rooms that are randomly generated, fight a few bosses, and repeat the process over and over. Now, I'm not going to act like I'm the biggest fan of these kinds of games or know all that much about them. I mean, I've dabbled in Isaac and Gungeon a little bit, and I've had some fun with them. I think it's fun to pick them up and play for like a little hour or two, and then drop them, try them again a couple weeks, months, years later, and have a little bit of fun here and there. But this game, I mean, it was fine for what it was, but it really didn't stick with me all that much, and I don't see myself coming back to it. The gameplay felt fine, the top-down shooting felt serviceable, there was nothing really wrong there. The weapons felt okay, there were some interesting items. The enemies, I mean, I could take them or leave them. The bosses also really could take them or leave them. There really wasn't just much to comment on. There's multiple characters, you don't just play as Sam. Natriska is a character for some reason. I don't know. I really don't know on that one. But the gameplay just didn't really do all that much to excite me. I mean, it didn't do anything interesting for the genre. It felt really generic is what I think the best way to describe it. It just felt really generic, and it didn't feel like much of anything. I mean, it just felt like a little top-down roguelike shooter, and I don't really know why Serious Sam's name's on this, and I don't really know how much is going to get, quote, added to it since it's in early access. It's been in early access for nearly 3 years. I mean, how much more are they going to add to it? Despite feeling pretty generic, bland, and generally uninspired, it wasn't a bad game. It definitely isn't a bad game, but it's not one I would recommend. It doesn't stand up to the giants of the genre, and I mean, it just doesn't really have much going for it. I mean, there's a little bit of fun to be had here, but not much. Our next game doesn't have Serious Sam in the title, but it is a Serious Sam game. It is I Hate Running Backwards. Now, I Hate Running Backwards came out a number of years ago, and I remember playing it back when it came out and thought it was pretty decent. However, looking back, I'm like, it wasn't actually all that decent, but again, there is a little bit of fun to be had here. Graphically and aesthetically, yeah, nothing Serious Sam like. It looks like Minecraft, like actually, and the gameplay, well, it's interesting. It's an endless runner roguelike top-down shooter where you are moving backwards, so up towards the screen, and the enemies come, you know, from the bottom up, which is different from a normal like shooter, like really any shooter of this kind, but it is different. And you really just try to survive. You can destroy the environment with a spin. You get a ton of different weapons. There's items to use. There's actually a bunch of characters. This is like a crazy Devolver crossover where Gungeon's here, Sam's here, Shadow Warrior's here, Broforce is here, Nuclear Throne's here. Why are all these Devolver series all coming together to, you know what, it is what it is. It's really crazy. Like, half the time you can barely even see what's going on screen. You're just trying to shoot your way through everything and just trying to survive and get through these 5 environments, and then it starts over and repeats itself. Now, the game can actually have a pretty decent gameplay loop, and it really hooked me in eventually for some real fun, and that's when I put a bunch of time into this game. However, that was after like a good couple hours of just kind of dying and not really knowing what I was doing, and to be honest, that's just not really good game design. I shouldn't have to put a bunch of time into it to figure out how all these mechanics work when they just don't really properly explain them, and in the end, like half the time I spent playing this game, I was just trying to figure out how it worked. And I mean, yeah, once I figured out how it worked, it was fun. It did have some fun, but It shouldn't have taken that long. That's a really big hurdle and kind of too much to ask for these days. On top of that, the game is actually pretty hard. Like, it is quite challenging and it can be really crushing, especially in the early hours, and it's just another reason why I'm like, it's not really a pick up and play kind of game at all when it really should be. I mean, you look at this kind of style of game and it really should be, and it's not. I'll give a special shout out to the bosses though. I really did enjoy the design of them and I really liked fighting them despite how difficult they were, but I hate running backwards. It really should have been a lot better than it is. Alright, so our next game is Serious Sam Double D. Now, Double D is probably the most well-known Serious Sam indie game because it was like the first one and the one with the most marketing. And you know, this game, it ain't all that bad. The story sees Sam following after Mental and killing all of his hordes in multiple time periods. And I mean, you know, that's pretty on brand for Sam, but it's not just the desert here. You get to go to a few different time periods. Like, you get to actually go to the Jurassic era. That's a new era for Serious Sam, a new area for sure. The characters, the cutscenes, the voice acting, the whole story, yeah, that wasn't so good, but at least you can skip it. It was pretty dumb overall, and there really wasn't much to it, and I'm gonna just skip that. The gameplay, though, the gameplay is actually pretty okay. It is from a 2D perspective, and it is actually kind of in line with Serious Sam. You kill, like, everything that moves. You shoot tons and tons of monsters, hordes of these things. A lot of the levels are relatively flat. I mean, there obviously is some platforming, and the platforming is pretty whatever. There's not much to it, but a lot of the areas are flat, and you just get dumped into this environment where you just are forced to kill everything. And, you know, the shooting actually feels nice. It actually does control well. The game controls well. It looks pretty alright. Fighting these enemies is fun. The enemies are somewhat engaging. There are a lot of annoying enemies here, of course, but there are some cool new ones to the series. But then we come into the game's biggest element, the biggest gimmick, what it really is all about, the gun stacker. You see, something that this game has is where you stack guns on top of each other and then you shoot from all the guns at once. And you can customize what guns you want to stack. You can come up with all these unique combinations with a bunch of Sam weapons. Like, a bunch of Serious Sam weapons are in this game, if not almost all of them that were out at the time. And I actually think that the gun stacker idea is a good idea. It would only ever work in like a 2D setting like this, and I think that it is executed pretty decently. I like how you can stack it. I like eventually how you get to stack like 5 or 6 guns towards the end of the game, and you just start blowing shit up. You just put your favorite weapons all together, or you stack a bunch of the same weapon to make some crazy combination. I think that is actually a really good mechanic for a game like this. And I wish the game actually did a little bit more with it, and I wish it did a little bit more with these enemies, since a lot of them feel very similar. These bosses are just really bad, actually. They just feel like big enemies, and they don't really have much to them. You can walk on corpses. That's something different from other Sam games, and the game felt generally kind of samey. And by the end of it, I thought the gameplay was actually getting kind of stale and pretty old. And also the music. Normally I love music like this, like Painkiller, but the music in this game just fucking sucks. I'd say a pretty middle of the road to okay game. Not a bad game by any means, but I don't know if I'd recommend it all that much, especially to anyone who doesn't like Serious Sam. Okay, our next Serious Sam indie game is Serious Sam Bogus Detour, which was released in 2017. I reviewed this game a couple years ago and thought it was actually pretty decent to good. I still think that. The story really doesn't make all that much sense. I guess Sam's going to go fight some more of Mental's people and takes a, quote, bogus detour and fights more of them and fights some other creatures that are just all over the place, and you go to a couple different environments. It's not just the desert, and eventually you end up on the moon, so there's that. Weird plot aside, I think the gameplay is actually pretty decent. The game is a twin-stick shooter and plays very similar to Hammerwatch, if you've heard of that game. It is even by the same developer. You could play through the whole game single player or co-op. Really, it just involves you going through a bunch of these environments, killing everything that moves, and doing some basic exploration and the occasional puzzle solving. It's not all that different from a regular Serious Sam game. Obviously, the perspective is totally different and how the game controls is totally different, but progression-wise, it's not that far off. The game does actually control pretty well. The controls really are intuitive. Everything feels nice. The shooting actually does feel satisfying and it does feel nice. And blasting enemies across the screen, yeah, it's good fun. A lot of the enemies are from the actual Sam games. There are some new ones here, and these new ones, well, they ain't so great. But the regular Sam enemies, you know, it's a good time killing them. And a lot of the weapons that are iconic to Serious Sam are here. There's a couple here that are a little different from the norm, but they're here. Sam even has a roll he can do, which is essential to this game because your ass is going to be rolling a bunch. You are bombarded by projectiles and enemies a ton in this game, sometimes in close environments. Rolling is the name of the game here if you want to avoid getting killed, and the game does have a live system, which is kind of annoying. Something else that's different from the main series is the level design. Yes, to an extent, it still is a bunch of arenas that you fight enemies in, yes, but there is a lot of just open area exploration you have in this game. Like, these levels are massive. That definitely could have used a map, and you'll find yourself kind of exploring around trying to figure out where to go next more than once, sometimes in the same map, and they're just a little too big, and I don't know about this exploration. That ain't it, Chief. And something else that kind of pads out these levels are these fucking mines where you have to either get really close and blow them up to not get hit or just avoid them entirely. I really hated these mines. These were really annoying. Another thing that was new for the series is experience points. These would also be in Serious Sam 4. These are pretty standard and they're in just tons and tons of games nowadays, but they were introduced here, so there's that. I at least thought the presentation was pretty good. The aesthetics were nice. I thought the graphics were fine enough, and the music, it was actually pretty good. I thought the music was good. I've heard some people complain about this game with its weapon to enemy damage ratios and how it doesn't really line up with the main games all that much, and yeah, it really doesn't, but it is a totally different kind of game again, and I mean, it is a top-down indie shooter, so I'm sure some liberties were taken, but the game was still decently fun. I did also have some problems with crashing, especially towards the end of the game, and I won't lie, towards the end of the game did feel quite bloated, and it did get a bit repetitive. It went on just a little bit too long for my liking, but I still think it is a pretty decent to good game. But would I recommend it? Maybe. I mean, if you like twin-stick shooters and you have a buddy and it is pretty cheap, and I guess if you like Serious Sam, maybe it's worth trying. Otherwise, you could do a lot better than this. But, you know, this game, it's pretty okay, especially compared to what we've seen so far. Our next game is Serious Sam Siberian Mayhem, which is our newest Serious Sam game, spin-off or otherwise, and is the first game on this list to make me go, wow, this is a great game. Because you know what? Serious Sam Siberian Mayhem is actually a really good game. The game is a standalone expansion to Serious Sam 4, and really the story has nothing to do with any of the Serious Sam games and kind of just retcons itself by the end of it, but it sees Sam in Siberia working with Russians to just take out more of Mental's forces. Thankfully, like, all the cringe from Serious Sam 4 has kind of been taken out. There's really almost no cutscenes, the voice acting is pretty fine enough, and the other characters are very minimal, and they really are just kind of there, which is fine with me because I did not like all that extra shit in 4. And the gameplay, oh, it's good. It's basically Serious Sam 4 but jacked up on steroids. It's much more in line with the other Serious Sam games. The level design feels much more like the other Serious Sam games. All those big open environments that were hella empty in 4, pretty much almost gone in this game. Very minimal compared to 4. The weapons, they all feel great. They're all really fun to use. And the way the game ramps up its enemy count and the way that it ramps up just everything, the general pacing of this campaign is actually superb. The game is only like 5-6 hours maybe, but those 5 or 6 hours are a total blast, and the game just goes absolutely nuts. There are 5 levels, but by the second level, you are killing so many enemies, you can't even, like, see the ground anymore. They're just everywhere. There's so many enemies, and they give you all the good weapons from the series. Like, they give you all the classics. They give you a few new ones, like this laser or the crossbow, that just totally destroys these fools. Like, you are just cleaning house in this game, and it is not only incredibly satisfying, but it is just freaking fun, man. Like, I have not had this much fun with a Serious Sam game in quite some time. That feeling of being completely overwhelmed and engulfed by enemies, and you just have to fight your way out, running backwards, holding back on the keyboard, and just shooting everything, like, that was a feeling that I never really got, if I got it all, in Serious Sam 4, but it is here in just about every single level, and a lot of the enemies are really satisfying to kill. A lot of them are from Serious Sam 4, but there are some new ones here, and you know, they're actually pretty alright. Speaking of new, the game does have some new vehicles you get to go in and kill shit in, and I gotta say, this tank in particular was my favorite. This was really fun. Like, this is maybe the most fun I've had in a vehicle in a Serious Sam game. Like, it was actually that well done. You just blow shit up. Like, this is what I've wanted in the Serious Sam games for years, since 3 really, is like just so many enemies that the game is just struggling to even run at this point, and you just blow everything up. And the levels are not full of a bunch of fluff and bullshit. No, you just kill, kill, kill. There's side objectives that return from 4, and these are way better than 4s. They're all meaningful, they give you good rewards, they have bosses, they have a ton of fun little gimmicks, and even throwbacks to old Serious Sam games where you just kill, kill, kill. The game even brings back usable items from Serious Sam 4, and these are actually much more useful than they were in 4, and they give them to you a lot more prevalently. The game also does pretty much the same with the skill points, kind of just expediting the process. They give you a bunch at first, so then you can just get all the good shit immediately. This game was mostly developed by the fans, a group known as Time Lock Studios, and then I guess Crow Team kind of like polished it up, and then Devolver put it out all of a sudden, and you know, the fans really understood what makes Serious Sam games great, because this is the most fun I've had with a new FPS in quite some time. Like, it was just actually really well done. I think the game's greatest strength really is the pacing, though. Like, it just goes through all the fluff, all the BS. No, none of that. It just gives you what you want immediately. Serious Sam 4, I felt like it took forever to get to the really good stuff. This, it's like immediate. It's not all perfect, though. There are all these really weird, stupid puzzles that show up once or twice in the game, and occasionally there is the big open area. Like, once or twice, yeah, there is a big open area with kind of nothing in it, and I'm like, why do they even have these? Like, this has just never been a good idea. But that aside, Serious Sam's Siberian Mayhem, I have zero problem recommending. If you have not played it and you like Serious Sam, this is a must play, like, immediately. Just go get the game ASAP. It's actually really good. And I think the very best of the Serious Sam spin-offs is the original spin-off, Serious Sam Next Encounter for the GameCube and PS2. I think Next Encounter is actually a great game. Not only do I think it's a great first-person shooter, but I think it's one of the very best Serious Sam games, spin-off or otherwise, and I think that it's actually really quite underrated, especially nowadays. I mean, it never really got all the attention it deserved and was considered a budget title when it came out, and I think it really stands up against some of the best. It was the very first Serious Sam game I ever played, so maybe there's a bias there. I remember picking this game up real cheap, like a couple bucks cheap, and I remember I could not put it down. I played it all weekend non-stop and just fell in love with it and knew I had to check out the rest of the series immediately. I think the developers really just understood what makes a Serious Sam game good, whether it's the level design or the enemies or the weapons or the weapon to enemy damage ratio, like in the balancing and everything that goes into that. Like, it all just really works in this game and it feels great. The pacing is great. The environments are actually different and varied. It's not just the desert. The desert isn't even in the game. The story just sees Sam going after one of Mental's minions through a bunch of different time periods and locations. Pretty standard stuff. The plot, it's fine enough, there's not all that much to it. But the environments and the worlds he goes to are very different. You start in like Rome, Greece area, then eventually you end up in Asia, and finally you end up in freaking Atlantis, and that's when the shit just gets bonkers. Like, the level design starts pretty standard for the norm of Serious Sam at the beginning in Greece. However, it quickly becomes very vertical. Like, most of these games are really flat, but not Next Encounter. It is not flat like at all, especially by even the midpoint of the game. And then at the end with Atlantis, this shit just gets wild, where like the anti-gravity stuff, the way these levels go through, you lost me. Like, it is so crazy, but it is so good. It's actually hella interesting. It's hella different, and it works. It actually fits in the series. It wasn't thrown in there willy-nilly. It actually feels like there was some meaning and purpose thrown into it, which is something that's really nice. There's a lot of enemies in this game. A lot of them are returning from the old games, but there's a ton of new ones, and I think the new ones actually are pretty good too. A lot of them provide a good challenge, and they're really fun to kill, and it's engaging. It's engaging and it's satisfying to kill these guys, and you do that with your weapons, of course. A lot of them are returning from the other games. You got the staples, but there are some new ones here. And some of these new ones feel like no-brainers, like the dual Uzis or this laser. Like, the laser's awesome. I love the laser. And something that this game has that I don't think any other Serious Sam game still has is multiple ammunition types. Like, you can actually get different ammunition types for your weapons. Isn't that incredible? You can get homing bullets. Homing bullets, where you just shoot into the air and the bullets magically go towards the enemies. That shit's awesome. But I really do like the different ammo types. I really do like the different enemy types, and I actually like that this game is challenging. I think that Next Encounter, while it does start out pretty easy, pretty tame, I think by the end of it, it actually does get really challenging, especially the Atlantis parts. It's not an easy game by that point. And while there isn't all that much of a penalty for dying, there is still one. The game does have a point system and a ranking system based on those points. I know it sounds crazy in 2022. And the way that the game works is killing stuff obviously gets you points. The more kills you get in a row though, the more the combo goes up. If you get to 20 kills in a row in a certain span of time, you actually get like this really big combo where you speed up, you do more damage, you start killing stuff, you get more points, and then eventually it ends and you start over. I think this is a really good gameplay loop. It keeps things fast, it keeps things engaging, and it actually just had some arcade fun in it. I don't know why this has never come back in a future Serious Sam game. I think it's fun. I think it makes the game feel more fast-paced. It adds this kind of hurry mentality to it that is really nice. And for anyone complaining, oh, you have to use a controller, no mouse and keyboard, the aim assist is very generous. It works fine in this game. I mean, I don't have any problem with it. I mean, it's how I played the game originally. I think with a PS2 controller, it's fine. And then there's also the car sections. Driving this thing, yeah, it's not too great to drive it, but at least it's fun to go around blowing shit up. And you know what? I'm just going to be here all day if I keep talking about Next Encounter, because Next Encounter is one of those games, massive amount of nostalgia, fond memories for, and could talk about really all day. I mean, it's just a great game, and if you have not tried it, out of all the games on this list, I would say this and Siberian Mayhem are definitely worth playing. Everything else you could pretty much skip in comparison, because these two are great, but Next Encounter, absolutely worth your time. Even if you mildly like Serious Sam, Next Encounter is worth your time. It is a fantastic first-person shooter. I've always had a ton of fun with it, and I really have no idea why it has not been re-released in some shape or form all these years later. It desperately needs a re-release. Next Encounter, oh, I'd buy it in a heartbeat if it got a re-release or a remaster along the lines of Serious Sam HD. Like, where is it? Why have we not gotten it yet? Anyway, that's it for this video. I've gone on long enough about Serious Sam and its spin-offs and Next Encounter in particular. Check out Next Encounter. It's worth your time. If you made it to this part of the video, major thank you. Like, major thank you. This has been a long video. I had a lot to talk about with the spin-offs. There's really actually a lot to talk about with the spin-offs. If you made it to this part of the video, let me tell me bricks in the comments. It'll be our little secret. Anyway, I hope everyone has a great New Year's, Christmas, 4th of July, Valentine's Day, whatever's near you. Stay safe, everyone. Stay warm. It's getting chilly out there. See ya.